When it comes to the horror of a mother killing her children, unfortunately history has no shortage of such crimes. Perhaps one of the most well-known of this group is Susan Smith. It all started on October 24, 1994, when 23-year-old Susan Smith pounded on the door of a resident of Union, South Carolina, who alerted police that Smith had just been carjacked in this small, rural town. Smith claimed that while stopped at a red light, an unknown African-American man pulled a gun on her and demanded the car. She reacted by jumping out of the car, but the alleged carjacker took more than Susan Smith's burgundy Mazda protege. Her two small children, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, were still strapped in their car seats as the unknown carjacker sped away. The local, state and federal law enforcement communities, as well as the residents of Union, South Carolina, spared no resource when it came to the search for toddlers Michael and Alex. The search was conducted on foot, by helicopter, bloodhounds, and hundreds of volunteers. Prayer services held all over the state, all anxious for the safe return of the boys. But by far the biggest partner in the search for Michael and Alex was the media. The abduction of Michael and Alex made national news instantly. Overnight, the tiny town of Union was lined with television trucks and newscasters doing stand-ups, and the abduction and current status of the search were the top story of every major news outlet. From national network news to newspapers and radio, the entire nation was following this story. Initial television coverage centered on the alleged crime and composite sketch of the suspect, but the main focus was on the pleas of Susan Smith for the safe return of her children. By her side during these appeals to the alleged carjacker to bring the children back unharmed was David Smith, Susan Smith's estranged husband. Although still legally married, the two had separated some time before the children were abducted. Still, they presented a united front as they faced the cameras in an effort to bring the children home. Since Susan was the one with the children at the time of the abduction, she did most of the talking. So with the only two obvious outcomes being finding the children released somewhere or some demand for ransom being made, newscasters and interviewers approached Susan Smith and David Smith with nothing but empathy. Anyone who recalls that time can bring to mind the repeated images of the seemingly tearful mother and stoic father pleading for the return of their sons. You see, there were several problems with Susan's story. Union is a rural town with an extremely low crime rate, and, well, yes, something horrible can happen anywhere. But the bigger problem on everyone's mind was this: why would a carjacker drive away with the two kids? It would have been easy enough to simply leave them somewhere elsewhere unharmed, where they would have been found by the massive search, or keep them for ransom. This phantom perpetrator did neither. But with the children still gone, and no ransom demand forthcoming, by day 9 of the search, both the American public and the media were starting to turn their focus on Susan Smith herself, and ask some serious questions of the young mother. What the public didn't know at the time is that law enforcement had suspected her very early on. On day 2 of the search, she agreed to take a polygraph, which she failed. She had been interrogated daily. That day, both Susan and David Smith appeared on all 3 top network national morning shows to face the growing accusations against them, primarily directed at Susan. Susan reiterated repeatedly that she had nothing to do with their disappearance, while David would only say that he believed his wife. That very afternoon, Susan Smith broke down under interrogation and confessed that the children had not been taken, and revealed the horror that shocked everyone in America. Her 2 toddler children were at the bottom of John D. Long Lake, still in her car. Divers soon recovered the car, the tiny bodies of the boys still strapped in their car seats. Divers said they could see one of the boys' little hands pressed against a window. That evening came the horrifying announcement of the recovery of the car and the boys' bodies, and Smith's subsequent arrest. The country was in absolute shock seeing the footage of the car being trailered from John D. Long Lake. So the obvious question is, why? What would cause an otherwise loving mom of 2 adorable young sons to deliberately drown them in a lake? The horrible details would soon come out at trial. Smith claimed she was suicidal and had originally intended to kill herself along with the boys. Obviously, whether or not she was suicidal, she had instead committed murder. The 17-day no cameras allowed trial was no doubt heavy and horrible in any number of ways, but there were 2 sickening low points. First was the testimony of David Smith, his life as the father of Michael and Alex, the beautiful times they shared, and the unmitigated pain and devastation of life without them. And the second was video evidence produced by the state, where a car, the same make and model as Susan Smith's car, was allowed to roll into John D. Long Lake. Exterior video showed the length of time and how long Smith would have had to try and free the boys. 6 minutes. Far worse, chilling interior video from the back seat position shows exactly what occurred in the car as it slowly filled with water, leaving one's common sense to imagine what Michael and Alex went through during those 6 very long minutes as they slowly and helplessly drown. With an ironclad confession in hand, a guilty verdict was virtually guaranteed. The question was whether or not Susan Smith would face the death penalty. While the state had no legal burden to prove motive, they decided to try to anyway. They introduced evidence that Susan had been dating a wealthy local businessman who had specifically told her he did not want to pursue the relationship further because he did not want to be a father. The state, of course, implying that getting her boys out of her way, she could perhaps have a relationship with this man. However, this may not have been the smartest legal move on the part of the state, since it allowed the defense to introduce evidence of Susan Smith's true psychological state. Susan Smith had not had a good upbringing by any standards. Her father committed suicide when she was just 6 years old. Her stepfather testified that he had been sexually abusing her since she was 15 and had done so as recently as 3 months before the murder of Michael and Alex. She also had a history of depression and had already made several suicide attempts. So it was true that she had her share of abuse and trauma in her upbringing and was by all reasonable standards an attentive and loving mother. While none of this information justified the murders or would relieve her of the murder conviction, it was successful in sparing her life. So what has the last 28 years been like for Susan Smith? And who has she evolved into? Susan Smith has not exactly been a model prisoner. It is said that she is extremely manipulative, particularly with male guards. Since her incarceration some 28 years ago, Smith has managed to engage several male guards in sexual relationships. One such guard even had the courage to tell the story of his short-lived affair with Smith on a major American talk show, and his honest account ended with his sincere admission that doing so was,
"I made a mistake, and I allowed it to happen. I had the power to say no, and I didn't."
Then there was her brief attempt at internet dating, prison style. Many websites exist that allow inmates to post a photo of themselves, a description, and the address where you can write to the inmate. Smith once attempted to use one such service, but when it was discovered by the general public, the company and/or prison received so much backlash that it was removed soon thereafter. The American public in particular have long memories when it comes to such heavily covered and heinous crimes, and they were quick to make their feelings known on this issue. The American public, at least, has decided that when it comes to online dating, Smith's Lonely Hearts Club is going to be a club of one. Still, every killer has their groupies, and it is said that Smith maintains a lively correspondence with at least one alleged serious romance at this time. Well, as serious as one can be when you're serving a life sentence for killing your 2 children. So, there's that. The boat ramp at John D. Long Lake, the site of the horrible murder of these 2 innocent young boys, has become such a frequently visited area that the state finally closed it completely. While it is true that the vast majority of these visitors were only coming to pay their respects, it only seems right that the site of their demise shouldn't turn into a tourist stop. And the final note: incredibly, Susan Smith will be eligible for parole in 2024, having served 30 years of her life sentence. Who can say what a parole board might do? But considering her prison conduct and the lingering general outrage of the American public against Susan Smith, the chances of her going free seem rather unlikely at best. Thanks for watching, and make sure you subscribe for more Bad Things videos. And let us know in the comments if you think Susan Smith should be granted parole in 2024.